Hello and welcome to the next edition of the BriefingsDirect Voice of the Analyst podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator. Join us now as we hear from leading IT industry analysts and consultants on how to best make the hybrid IT journey to successful digital business transformation. Our next interview examines how new machine learning and artificial intelligence capabilities are being brought to bear on hybrid IT complexity challenges. We'll now explore how mounting complexity and a lack of multi-cloud services management maturity must be solved in order for businesses to grow and thrive as digital enterprises. Here to report on how companies and IT leaders are seeking new means to manage an increasingly complex transition to sustainable hybrid IT, we're joined by Paul Teisch. He's the Principal Analyst at Tirias Research in Austin, Texas. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, how are you doing, Dana?
I'm doing great. You know, you and I have appeared on a number of panels and some videos over the years, but it's great to have you on my BriefingsDirect podcast. I've been looking forward to this.
Same here. Thanks.
Yeah. So, Paul, you know, there's a lot of evidence that businesses are adopting cloud models at a rapid pace. Now, there's also lingering concern about the complexity of managing so many fast-moving parts. We've got legacy IT, we have private cloud, public cloud, SaaS, and, of course, multi-cloud. So as someone who tracks technology and its consumption, how much has technology itself been tapped to manage this sprawl, if you will, of hybrid IT?
I think so far, not very much, mostly because of the early state of multi-cloud and the hybrid cloud business model. As you know, it takes a while for management technology to catch up with the actual compute technologies and storage. And so I think we're seeing kind of the management is the tail of the dog. It's getting wagged by the rest of it, and it just hasn't caught up yet.
Yeah, it seems that things have been moving so quickly with cloud computing that few organizations have had an opportunity to sort of step back and examine what's actually going on around them, never mind react to it. We really are playing catch-up, as you say.
Yep. I think, you know, as we look at the options available, the cloud giants, the public cloud services don't have much incentive to work together. And so you're looking at a market where it's going to be third parties stepping in to help manage multi-cloud environments. And it's a lag time between having those services available and having the cloud services available and then seeing the third-party management solutions step in.
Sure. I think it's natural to see that a specific cloud environment, whether it's purely public like AWS or a hybrid like Microsoft Azure and Azure Stack, you know, they want to help their customers, but they want to help their customers all get to their solutions first and foremost. So it's a natural thing. We've seen this before in technology. And there's not that many organizations that are willing to step into that neutral position of being ecumenical, of saying we want to help the customer first, manage first. And so as we look to how this might happen, it seems to me that, you know, previous models of management, agent-based, single pane of glass, and unfortunately still in some cases spreadsheets and Post-it notes have been brought to bear on this. But it seems to me that we might be in a different ballgame, Paul, with hybrid IT, that there's just too many moving parts, too much complexity, and that we might need to look at data-driven approaches. What is your take on that?
I think that's exactly correct. As we look at it, one of the jokes in the industry right now is if you want to find your stranded instances in the cloud, cancel your credit card. And AWS or Microsoft would be happy to notify you of all of the instances that you have, you're no longer paying for because your credit card expired. It's hard to keep track of this because we don't have adequate tools yet. That single pane of glass, looking at a lot of, I'd say, data and almost information, it is overload when you're an IT manager. You're at a mid-sized or a large corporation. You have a lot of folks, you know, paying out of pocket right now, slapping a credit card down on public cloud. So you don't have a full picture. Where you do have a picture, there are so many moving parts. And I think we have to get past having a screen full of data, screen full of information, and to a point where we have insight. And that is going to require a new generation of tools, probably borrowing from some of the machine learning evolution that's happening now in pattern analytics.
Yeah, the timing in some respects couldn't be better, right? Just as we're facing this sort of massive problem of complexity and volume and velocity in managing IT across a hybrid environment, we have at this point some of the most powerful and cost-effective means to deal with data problems just like that. But, Paul, before we go into that, let's hear a little bit more about you and your organization, and tell us, if you would, what a typical day is like in the life of Paul Teich.
Well, so Curious Research, we're a boutique industry analyst, and by boutique we mean there's three of us. We're three principal analysts. We've just added a few senior analysts. We're close to the metal. We live in the infrastructure, so we're all former engineers and or product managers. We're very familiar with deep technology, and so my day tends to be a lot of reading. We look at a lot of chips. We look at a lot of service level information, and our job is to, at a very fundamental level, take very complex products and technologies and surface them to business decision makers, IT decision makers, folks who are trying to run lines of business and make a profit. And so we kind of do the heavy lifting on why is new technology important, disruptive, transformative.
Well, let's go back into this idea of data-driven and analytics as applied to IT management and complexity. So if we can apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to solve business problems outside of IT in such verticals as retail, pharmaceutical, transportation, with these same characteristics of volume and velocity and variety, why not apply that to IT? And is this a sort of a case of the cobbler's kids having no shoes? You'd think IT would be among the first to do this.
The way we look at it, the cloud giants have already implemented systems like this because of necessity. So they've been at the front end of essentially that big data mantra of volume, velocity, and all of that. To actually train some of the new pattern analytics, especially the deep learning stuff, you need a lot of data. You can't actually train a system usefully without presenting it with a lot of use cases. And so, the public clouds have had this data. They're operating social media services and large retail storefronts, e-tail. And I think what we're seeing is, as the public cloud became available to enterprise, the IT management problem ballooned into a big data problem. I don't think it was, 5 or 10 years ago, that much of a big data problem, but now it is. And so I think that's the biggest transformation, is that there's, your internal IT department doesn't run all of your job anymore. And we all know that, but we haven't actually internalized what that means operationally. And so I think that's the biggest sea change, is that we're generating big data in the course of managing our IT infrastructure now. And that means we need big data tools to go analyze it and to get that insight. It's too much data flowing by for humans to comprehend in real time.
And, of course, we're also talking about islands of data. So you might have a lot of data in your legacy management operations. You might have Tier 1 apps that you're running on older infrastructure, and you're probably happy to do that. It might be very difficult to transition those specific apps into newer operating environments, workload environments. You've also got, of course, multiple SaaS and cloud data repositories, but there's also not only the data within those apps, but there's sort of the metadata as to how those apps are running and what they're doing. It seems to me that not only would you benefit from having a comprehensive data and analytics approach to your IT operations, but you might have a workflow and process benefit by being Uber, by being on top of all of these islands of data. So to me, moving towards an intelligence and a data capability for IT is the gift that would keep giving, that you would be able to also provide insight into an Uber approach to process, which could be across your organization, across the supply chain, across a partner network, and back into your customers. So do you also see that there's an ancillary benefit to having that sort of data capability?
I do. And on one end of the spectrum, it's simply, what do you need to do to keep the lights on? Where is your data, all of it, in the various islands and collections, and the data you're sharing with your supply chain as well? Where is the processing that you can apply to that data? Increasingly, I think we're looking at a world where our data is stored is more important than the processing power. We've got processing power pretty much everywhere now. And so moving data from place to place, setting up the connections and tearing them down if necessary, but the management of what you have then segues into all of this workflow. Once I know what I've got and I'm managing it at a baseline effectively, then I can start to improve my processes. Then I can start to get better workflows internally as well as with my supply chain. But I think at first it's simply, what do I have right now? And as an IT manager, how can I rein in some of these credit card instances, credit card storage on the public cloud, and put that all into the mix? I have to know what I know first. Then I can start to streamline. Then I can start to control my costs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how can you know which people you want to give even more credit on their credit cards to let them do more of what they're doing? Because it might be very innovative and it might be very cost effective versus those that actually might be wasting money and spinning their wheels, repaving cow paths over and over again. You don't have the ability to make those decisions without the insight, without the visibility, and then to further analyze it as to how best to go about it seems to me a no-brainer. It comes at an auspicious time as IT is trying to refactor its value to the organization. If in fact they're not running servers and networks and keeping the trains running on time, they have to start being more in the business of defining what trains should be running and then how to make them the best business, engines, if you will. So do you see that IT needs to perhaps think about their role differently, stepping up their game and abstraction, and then starting to use technologies like management, look to vendors with a neutral perspective to give them the tools, start to perhaps become the overseers of operations at a sort of fundamentally different level?
I think that's right. And it's an evolutionary step. I don't think it's revolutionary. I think that's in the same way you add servers to a VM farm. As your demand increases, as your baseline demand increases, IT needs to keep a handle on costs. And so you understand what jobs are running where and how much more capacity you need. One of the things they're missing with random access to the cloud is bulk purchasing. And so at a very fundamental level, helping your organization manage which clouds you're spending on by aggregating the purchase of storage, aggregating the purchase of compute instances to get just better buying power, doing price arbitrage where you can. To me, those are fundamental qualities of IT going forward in a multi-cloud environment. And they're extensions of where we are today. It just doesn't seem like that, right? They've always added new servers to increasing internal capacity, and this is just the next evolutionary step.
Yeah, no, it certainly makes sense that you would move as maturity occurs in any business function more towards that orchestration and automation and optimization than simply getting the parts in place. So really, I think what you're describing, interestingly enough, Paul, is that IT is becoming more like a procurement function and less like a building or architecture or construction function. And that's just as powerful. And it's not that many people can make those procurement decisions without knowing a lot about the technology. Not anybody with just business acumen can walk in and make these decisions. I think this is an opportunity for IT to really elevate itself and become even more essential to businesses.
In a way, Yes, I think the opportunity is a lot like if you think of the Sabre airline scheduling system that nearly every airline uses now. That's a fundamental capability for doing business, and it's separate from the technology of Sabre. Is the ability to schedule people on airplanes is a lot like scheduling storage and jobs on compute instances. So I think there will be this step. But to go back to the technology versus procurement, I think some element of that has always existed in IT as well, in terms of dealing with vendors and doing the volume purchases on one side, but having some architect know how to compose the hardware and the software infrastructure to serve those applications. We're simply translating that now into, I've got a multi-cloud architecture. How do I connect those pieces, right? What network capacity do I need to buy? What kind of storage architectures do I need? I don't think that all goes away. I think it becomes more important as you look at, for instance, AWS as a very large bag of services that it's very powerful. You can assemble it in any way you want, but in some respects, that's like programming in C. You have all the power of assembly language and all the danger of assembly language because you can walk off into memory and delete stuff. And so you have to have architects who know how to build a service that's robust, that won't go down, that serves your application most efficiently. And all those things are still hard to do. So architecture and purchasing are both still necessary. They don't go away. I think the important part is that the orchestration part now becomes as important as deploying a service on a set of infrastructure because you've got multiple sets of infrastructure.
Yeah, it really has to be sort of an enlightened procurement, not just blind procurement. And the people who are in the trenches that are just buying these services, whether they're developers or operations folks, they don't have that oversight, that view of the big picture to make those larger decisions about optimization of purchasing and what have you. So that gets us back to some of our earlier points of, what are the tools, what are the management insights that these individuals that are looking at it, the holistic hybrid IT environment, need in order to make those decisions. And like a Sabre organization where they're going to optimize to fill every hotel room or every airplane seat, eventually we're going to want to fill every socket, right? We're going to want all that bare metal and all those virtualization instances to be fully optimized, whether it's your cloud or somebody else's. It seems to me that there's an algorithmic approach eventually, right? Somebody's going to need to be the keeper of that algorithm as to how this operates, but you can't program that algorithm if you don't have the insights into what's going on and what works and what doesn't. So what do you think is needed? What's the next step in terms of the technology catching up to the management requirements in this new hybrid IT complex environment?
Well, I think on small scale, people can develop some of that experience, but there's so many dimensions to managing a multi-cloud hybrid business model, IT infrastructure, that it's throwing off all of this metadata for performance and efficiency, and it's ripe for machine learning. In a strong sense, I think we're moving so fast right now that if you're an organization of any size, machine learning has to come into play to help you get better economies of scale. It's just going to be looking at a bigger picture. It's going to be managing more variables and learning across a lot more data points than a human can possibly comprehend. And we're at this kind of really interesting point in the industry where we are getting deep learning approaches to that are coming online cost effectively that can help us do that. They have a little while to go before they're fully mature. But I think that IT organizations who learn to take advantage of these systems now are going to have a head start, and they're going to be more efficient than their competitors.
Yeah, and I suppose at the end of the day, if you're all using similar cloud services, that the differentiation between your company and your competitor is how well you utilize and optimize those services. And so the baseline technologies are becoming commoditized. The optimization, that algorithmic approach to moving workloads and data, providing consumption models that are volume driven, that's going to be the difference between a 1% margin and a 5% margin over time.
I think so. It will definitely drive bottom line performance results, the efficiencies of scale. But the important part to remember is that these machine training algorithms are somewhat new. So there are several challenges with deploying them. First is the transparency issue. We don't quite yet know we know how they work, but we don't know how a deep learning model makes specific decisions. So we can't point to one aspect and say that aspect is managing this quality of our AWS service. It's kind of a black box model. We can't verify the results of these models. We know they're being efficient, and we know they're being efficient fast, but we can't verify that the model is as efficient as it could possibly be. So, and that's a room for improvement over the next few years. As the models get better, they'll leave less money on the table. We're also validating that when you build a machine learning model, that it's covering all the situations you want it to cover, and that you have an audit trail. So, for specific sets of decisions, especially with data that you have subject to regulatory constraints, you want to follow it. You want to know where it is and why you made decisions to move it. And then there's kind of the reproducibility issue is the last major challenge I'd see, is if I train two models differently, or if I use different hardware accelerators and slightly different data, I'm probably not going to recognize the same patterns. I'm not going to have exactly the same patterns of efficiency. And so that's also where some differentiation comes in. It's kind of a repeatability, reproducibility. So the net is, once you train a machine learning model, you kind of have to keep retraining it over time. And your model is not going to do the same thing as your competitor's model almost as a given today. And so what data you use to train the model with, what seed models you use, there's a bunch of different things that basically we're at the early days of machine learning. And there's a lot of room for differentiation, a lot of room for learning. Just have to go into it with your eyes open that occasionally things will go sideways. Your model might do something unexpected, and you just have to be prepared for that.
Yeah. It raises an interesting point, Paul, because even as the baseline technology services in the cloud era become commoditized, you're going to have a very specific, unique, and custom approach to your management and to your optimization. It's not going to be like any other company. And I think getting that machine learning capability attuned to your specific hybrid IT panoply of resources and assets is going to be a gift that keeps giving, because not only will you run your IT better, you'll run your business better, but you'll also be fleet and agile. So if risk happens, whether it's a cybersecurity risk, whether it's a natural disaster risk, whether it's a business risk of an unintended or unexpected change in your supply chain or in your business environment, you're going to be in a position to react, because you're going to have your eyes to the ground. You're going to be well tuned to your specific global infrastructure, and you'll be able to make good choices. So I'm with you. I think machine learning is essential, and the sooner you get involved with it, the better. So before we sign off, we're almost out of time. Who do you think are some of the vendors and some of the technologies that we will look to fill this apparent vacuum on the management? It seems to me that traditional IT management vendors would be a likely place to start.
I think they are a likely place to start. The big OEMs, all of them are starting to say something about being in a multi-cloud environment, about being in a multi-vendor environment. They're already finding themselves there with virtualization. And I think that the key is they recognize that they are in a multi-vendor world. There are some startups, and I can't name them specifically right now, but a lot of folks working on this problem of how do I do IT. in-house IT and multi-cloud orchestration. A lot of work going on there. We haven't seen a lot of it publicly yet, but there's a lot of venture capital being placed. I think this is the next step. Just like PCs came into the office, smartphones came into the office, as we move from server farms to the cloud, going from cloud to multi-cloud. It's attracting a lot of attention, but the hard part right now is knowing who to place your faith in. I think the name brands that people are buying their internal IT from right now are probably good near-term bets in the short term. I think as the industry gets more mature, we'll have to see what happens.
Sure. We did hear some details, or at least vision, was painted by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise back in June at their Discover event in Las Vegas. I'm expecting to hear quite a bit more on something they've been calling new hybrid IT stack that seems to possess some of the characteristics we've been describing, visibility and management. So at least one of the older long-term IT management vendors is looking in this direction. So that's a place I'm going to be focusing and wondering what the competitive landscape is going to be and if they're going to be in this leadership position on this particular approach to management.
Actually, I think HPE is the only company I've heard from so far talking at that kind of level. Everybody's voicing some opinion about it, but from what I've heard, that it does sound like a very interesting approach to the problem. Microsoft actually constrained their view on Azure Stack to a very small set of problems, and is actively saying, no, I don't. If you're looking at doing all of this virtual machine migration and taking advantage of multi-cloud for very general purpose solutions, it's probably not something that you want to do yet. And so it was very interesting to me to hear about the new hybrid IT stack and what HPE is planning to do there.
Yeah, well, I think for Microsoft, the more automated they can make it, the more likely you'd be susceptible or tempted to want to just stay within an Azure or an Azure Stack environment. So I can appreciate why they would do that. I guess before we sign off, one other area I'm going to be really keeping my eyes closely to in the next 6 to 12 months is around orchestration of containers, Kubernetes in particular, because I think if you follow orchestration of containers and container usage in multi-cloud environments, that's going to be a harbinger of how the management's going to have to go as well. So another sort of a canary in the coal mine, if you will, as to, where things could get very interesting very quickly.
Absolutely. And I'd point out that the Linux Foundation's Cloud Native Con in early December looks like the place to be with nearly everyone in the server infrastructure community, cloud infrastructure signing on. And I think that's part of the interest is in basically interchangeable container services, and we'll see that be much more important. So that sleepy little technical show is going to be invaded by suits, I think, this year, and right. Worth paying a lot of attention to.
Agreed on that. All right, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how mounting complexity and a lack of multi-cloud services management maturity must be solved in order for businesses to grow and thrive as digital enterprises. And we've learned how companies and IT leaders are seeking new means to manage an increasingly complex transition to sustainable hybrid IT. We've also talked about how artificial intelligence and specifically machine learning might be an important element to be brought to solve some of these issues. And we've talked about some of the early days of some of the larger vendors coming to the market with solutions. So please join me in thanking our guests. We've been here with Paul Teich. He's the principal analyst at Tirias Research, and he's in Austin, Texas. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks, Dana. Very much appreciate it.
Paul, how can our listeners and readers best follow you to gain more of your excellent insights?
You can follow us at www.tiriasresearch.com, TIRIAS, and we are also we have a page on Forbes Tech, and you can find us there.
Very good. So also a big thank you to our audience for joining us for this BriefingsDirect Voice of the Analyst discussion on how to best manage the hybrid IT journey to digital business transformation. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise-sponsored interviews. Follow me on Twitter at Dana_Gardner, and find out more hybrid IT-focused podcasts at BriefingsDirect.com. Thanks again for joining, and pass this on to your IT community if you found it valuable, and do come back next time.